Welcome to the Business Talk, a global podcast series that highlights distinguished faculty members and their impactful scholarly contributions. I am Deepak, your host from India. We are honored to welcome Dr. Riccardo Viale as our distinguished guest on Business Talk today. Before we get started, I would like to introduce today's guest. Dr. Riccardo Viale is an Italian cognitive scientist and behavioral economist whose work on bounded rationality has shaped how social scientists, policymakers, and public administrations think about human decision making. A full professor of behavioral sciences and cognitive economics at the University of Milan, Bicocca, and Louis, he bridges academic research with practice through advisory roles to the Italian Prime Minister's office and leadership of the Italy Behavioral Insights team. Founded of the Herbert Simon Society and long-time editor-in-chief of Mind in Society. He has been a visiting scholar at leading institutions including Oxford, Columbia, UC San Diego, and Max Planck Institute for Human Development. His recent books, such as The Handbook on Bounded Rationality and Nudging, distill decades of research on how cognitive biases can be harnessed to improve innovation, public policy, and everyday choices. In today's episode, Dr. Riccardo Viale joins us to explore the core ideas from his book Nudging, how subtle policy nudges can help government empower citizens rather than manipulate their preferences or exploit their biases. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Riccardo Viale to the conversation. Professor Riccardo, it's a distinct privilege to welcome you to Business Talk. We are grateful to you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor, you argue that governments can use behavioral tools without manipulating citizens or exploiting their biases. How do you define this non-manipulative form of nudging in contrast to libertarianism paternalism popularized by Thaler and Sustained?
Yes, we have to think of paternalism according to the classical concept of paternalism introduced by John Stuart Mill with the book on liberty. There was, according to Mill, two kinds of paternalism. There is the means paternalism and goals paternalism. What characterizes the goal paternalism? The goal paternalism is when the state, the government, the king decide what is good for the citizen. And then they interpret the goal of the citizen and make possible and oblige sometimes the citizen to follow this goal. This is typical of the autocracy. Instead, the means paternalism that was supported by John Stuart Mill is when the government help the citizen to reach their own goal that are decided autonomously and not decided by the government. Then what metaphorically giving fishing rod to fish, and then to allow by education, by information, by many kind of helps, the citizen to have the right ability to decide for their own goals. Then this is what characterizes, for example, libertarian and not libertarian paternalism. A libertarian paternalism is a paternalism that improve the tools, the means for the citizen to decide autonomously. Non-libertarian paternalism when instead they manipulate their own behavioral change in a way that cannot be reversible. The libertarian paternalism then that is also present in the nudge theory is the intervention that are well transparent. The citizens are aware of what they are deciding, and in particular they can also decide not to follow the suggestion of the nudge. this kind of difference between libertarian and not libertarian paternalism is typical of what I call system one and system two nudges. Our mind, metaphorically, is divided in two systems. The system one is the system that decide in a fast way, automatically, unawarely, in association with association inside the mind. And the people, the human being is not able to control this kind of decision and behavioral change. System two, instead, is analytically and not intuitive like system one, is analytical, is not fast but is slow, is serial, is deductive, and so on. Then the problem is when you introduce a nudge, it's better to be libertarian to rely on system two of the mind, not on system one. For example, when you use a framing effect for messages like this milk is 90% fat-free, obviously this try to rely on system one of the mind and show only what is positive, and then the people tend to be more inclined to buy this kind of product because they see only the positive aspect. Instead, if you want to rely on system two nudge, you should do, okay, 90% fat-free, but also 10% fatty. Then the decision is taken considering all the information and not only trying to rely in a kind of bias reasoning.
Yes, your book engages deeply with the work of Professor Herbert Simon, Professor Gerd Gigerenzer, Professor Daniel Kahneman, and Professor Amos Tversky. How did these very different perspectives on bounded rationality and heuristics shape your vision of what a good nudge should look like?
Allora, the bounded rationality of Herbert Simon and Gigerenzer is very different from bounded rationality of Kahneman, Tversky, and also Richard Taylor, the Nobel Prize for Economics, one of the father of nudge. Bounded rationality, as you know, it was introduced by Herbert Simon in the 50s after the book on administrative behavior, the 47. The first, cioè Simon, Gigerenzer, and my model of bounded rationality start from a premise. We live in an environment characterized by uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity of information. Then it is impossible in the majority of the situation to know when one has to decide to take a decision, to know all the options that are available. Because the situation is not characterized by a stable structure, but it is unstable. Then you don't know what to do. You know that you may do something, but the option may be also many more. Then if you have not all the list of the options that are possible, you cannot analyze the consequences of the option according probability forecast, according to probabilistic prediction, and then you cannot attribute to the option the utility. Then from this point of view, obviously, this since the situation of your decision making is most of the time in this way, the only possibility is to try to find a solution, a choice that may be adaptive to the situation, even if it is not optimal, but is only satisfactory, or as Simon was calling, satisficing. And then this is the adaptive bounded rationality. to be rational, you should find adaptive solution, adaptive choice. Instead, the second consider boundary rationality as a kind of pathology of rationality. Means that since we are not able to be optimal, then they try to find where, in which kind of decision-making reasoning process we are not optimal. Analyzing the probabilistic reasoning, the deductive reasoning, the way in which we are biased in decision making, because they think that the structure of the environment may be analyzed probabilistically as if is a risk situation, not uncertain. Then, from the point of view of the we may say epistemological point of view, the most important difference between boundary rationality by Herbert Simon, Didier Renzer, boundary rationality by Kahneman, Tversky, and Taylor is the feature of the environment. And then this is the most important point. And from this point of view, obviously, adaptive boundary rationality propose nudge that allow people to be more adaptive, that empower their adaptivity to the situation. Instead, pathological boundary rationality or boundary rationality as a pathology of rationality is the typical approach to nudge that try to neutralize bias, because they consider every behavior that don't follow the optimal approach to decision making a kind of bias.
Professing distinguish between nudges that exploit our cognitive biases and nudges that can help overcome them. Could you walk us through a concrete example of each, one bad nudge and one good nudge, and explain what makes the difference ethically and practically?
Ma allora, if we have to distinguish good nudges and bad nudges, we may start from two examples. A bad nudge that is that is the most effective nudge is the default option. The default option is the option that use some kind of bias of our decision making, of our behavior, for example, status quo, inertia, procrastination, and using this kind of not a very effective behavior, try to reach, I mean the government try to reach some goal that may be also useful for the people. Then it has also a public well-being, public goods goal. For example, organ donation. If one is born in a country in which the default is to be an organ donor, the majority of people will be organ donor. Even if you can also decide to opt out, cioè to decide not to be organ donor. And a typical example is Austria. In Austria, organ donor are 95%. More or less the total amount of the people in Austria are organ donor. Instead, if you are born in a country in which you are not organ donor, and to become organ donor, you have to decide to become organ donor, then you have to decide to opt in, then we see that in this kind of country, the percentage of organ donor are more or less 10%, 12%, more or less. Germany is an example. Now, I don't know if in the last year there was a change about the legislation of organ donation. Then you see that how much is powerful or default. When you are in a default state, it's very difficult to change. Then the behavioral designer exploit this bias attitude of status quo bias, procrastination, inertia, to allow to reach a public policy goal, to have many organs in this case. But this obviously is a kind of manipulation, because if it was not a manipulation, then it would be the percentage of opt-in, opt-out, Austria versus Germany, very, very close. Perhaps 60% in Austria, 45% in Germany, because the people can change the default. Instead, the people, when they are in the default, don't change. The subscription of membership is also another example. If you are in a default situation, that the subscription, the resubscription to a membership of a club, of a trade union, so on, are automatically for default renew, is very difficult that you change. You allow the resubscription to continue, and this I find is not a very positive nudge. Instead, a good nudge, for me, the best nudge is the feedback. Since the people, human being, learn by doing and by the feedback they receive from the result of their action, then from this point of view, to have a feedback, improve the awareness, empower the people, allow them to change the behavior. There are many nudges that use the feedback. For example, ambient orb is a lamp that is used in some US state that become green in the apartment when you don't overcome some consumption of energy, and become instead red when you overcome the consumption energy. Then you learn how to manage the consumption of energy. There are other devices are more effective because increase the feedback. Like what, for example, Watson device tell you where you are consuming more energy. For example, the fridge, the electrical oven, something like that. Then you know also where to decrease the consumption of energy. This kind of feedback then are very good nudges. In any case, good nudges are usually nudges that use system tool. They rely on awareness. They are reversible. They give benefit to the public collectivity and not only to individual. Instead, the bad nudges are the opposite, that are based on system one, unaware. There are benefiting only individuals, and then they are more or less more difficult to change.
Professor, traditional policy often relies on information campaign and financial incentives. Where do you see the biggest failure of this classic approach? And how does a well-designed nudge can change citizen behavior in a way that respects conscious decision making?
Information campaign and financial incentive are usually an important aspect of public policy. Information campaign may be behaviorally designed, then may become a kind of nudges. It's not something different from nudges, completely detached from nudging. Because if a campaign is behavioral design, information campaign, public communication, I mean, for example, to improve the behavior during COVID-19, then they may use some behavioral phenomena that we may call also bias or effect, to give some weight more to some behavior than to other behavior. For example, using social norm, descriptive social norm, that means that describing the behavior of other or describing the behavior, for example, of important and reputational important people, like, for example, influencer. This is a kind of nudge that we rely on social norm and on imitation. Then, from this point of view, is public communication relying on some nudges? Or, for example, when a public communication rely on loss aversion to change the behavior of the people that don't want to lose, and then from this point of view, they behave in a different way. For example, I mean public communication about health problem, underlying some loss that the people may have if they behave not in a proper way. And then this is relying on loss aversion. This is a strong behavioral phenomenon. Or framing, or anchoring and recency, for example. If you want to give more weight to the information, you know that the people is more sensible to the first information and to the last information, because they are affected by anchoring effect and by recency effect. And then you can design the public communication according to this kind of behavioral phenomena. The financial incentives instead are very important, but sometimes are over-evaluated. Because, for example, there are many experiments made. For example, in organization, the dogma was that the increase of financial support increase also the output of the people that are working. So more money you give, better the work. Instead, there are many experiments that show that this is not the case. In many works, the financial incentive is not sufficient to motivate people to work, and then there is not a crowd-in effect, but sometimes there is a crowding out effect, because the people consider, if they think that they are only supported by financial incentive, they consider to be kind of not a faithful employee of the organization, but someone that are only considered a kind of person that is paid for what they are doing. Instead, the people want to be in organization also recognized for their own value as a member of the organization, part of the culture, and also open also supported to innovate organization, giving something more, and also doing the 1 mile more than what is expected. For example, there is the organizational citizenship behavior studies that show that more the organization, the manager, support altruism, civic identity, consciousness in the organization, more the organization work well. And these are something that are not connected to the financial incentive. And also there are some studies made about the reason why the company decide to create industrial plants in under the to this plant to underdeveloped country in which there is no industrial and economic growth, and why the company decide, not only because of financial incentive, but because they think that in this part of the region of the nation where to put this kind of plant, the environment is fine, there is security, there may be services and so on. And these become more salient than the financial incentive. This is a study made, for example, in Australia about this kind of behavioral motivation. Then financial incentives are important, but is not everything about the economic behavior.
Professor, in the book, you also talk about nudges the nudgers. What kind of cognitive biases or institutional pressures typically affect policymakers themselves? And how might behavior tools be used to improve the quality of their own decisions?
Yes, the nudged means the policymaker, the government is composed by human beings, and the human beings have the same feature as the citizen. Then I've been study the kind of bias, distortion that are present in the government and policymaker. There are three levels of analysis. The first is about the analysis of information, collection and analysis of information. In this case, there are typical bias are confirmation bias. That is the policymaker try to collect information that support their own theories. Then they are a kind of confirmation of what they believe is better. And this is also called cherry picking effect. Another also is framing. If you connect information that support a partial vision, this also is something that distorts your evaluation. And also distort the second level is the level of processing the choice. In the processing the choice that usually happen in a kind of group decision making, not individual usually, there are a lot of other kind of danger. For example, group think. The group think is when the decision taken in a group is not taken freely. There is someone that try to stop the critical discussion, for example, the chairman. And then there is a kind of anesthesia of critical reasoning. And when there is this, the situation is not considered properly. Another aspect is discontinuity effect. Then when in a minister there are different departments with different groups of that are studying a kind of regulation, these different group try to be competitive and tend to under-evaluate the support of the other. They try to under-evaluate the ability of the other group to find a proper solution. This is also based on self-serving bias. And another bias is similarity bias. Policymakers tend to think that their own decision represent what the people like. That is very similar to what the people are in the moment are liking. And usually this is the opposite. The third level is execution. Execute, to implement the decision. There are another set of problems. For example, illusion of control. You think that you control more the statistical variable than what is the reality. The planning bias. You think that you will be able to reach the step in your in your realistic way. Usually, the time and your plan are not will be not realized in the proper way. Third, hyper optimism about the result of your choice, overconfidence of your skills, and egocentric to be better than the other in implementing the regulation and the policy.
Professor,
Okay.
automatic enrollment in pension plans and flu shot scheduling are often cited as success stories. When you look across existing public policies, which real-world nudges come closest to your ideal of empowering, non-paternalistic intervention, and what can we learn from them?
Yes, I think if we have to list the best nudges that we may introduce, I was already speaking about feedback. That is very important. For example, the feedback when you are doing an investment or some saving that come from the bank about the consequences of what you are doing, then you are monitoring the effect of your investment. This is a typical good feedback. But as I told before, feedback about your energy consumption and any kind of feedback that inform you about the effect of your behavior. This obviously is very important. Another important empowering nudge, system to nudge, is neutralizing attention error. We know that we have a limited ability to pay attention to the details. We forget many time, many things, many information. Then nudge that I help you to neutralize the attention error is very important. For example, reminders or reminder that inform you that pay attention that you are forgetting some deadline, or visual cues in workplace to improve the security in the workplace. Or, for example, in mobility, progressive line narrowing when you arrive to a dangerous part of the road, for example, dangerous curve. This progressive line narrowing increase your perception of speed, and then the tendency is to decrease the speed, even if it is a kind of optical phenomena, for perceptive illusion. It's not a real improving of speed. Then this neutralize attention error. Another important set of good nudges is when they structure complexity. Many decisions are complex, there are too many variables. Then there are nudges that rely on some heuristic algorithm, for example, lexicographic heuristics or elimination by aspect, satisficing, are all kind of heuristics that tend to decrease the complexity. Usually now this is very easy to find in everywhere with the application. The application use this a goal to simplify the complexity of information. Application, for example, to find an hotel in which you write, you show your criteria, better criteria, maximum amount of money, historical center, inside the green, something like that, and the application decide on your behalf what are the final options. This is a typical important kind of behavioral help. Disclosure is also very important. Cioè, an important disclosure was made in US when there was a toxic release inventory, in which there was a list of the toxic release by the company from the most toxic to the less toxic, in which then when there was this kind of ranking was very important reputationally. Also, the consumer movement tried to support information about this ranking. People tended to buy goods from the company with less toxic release and went to invest in stock exchange, invest the bond, the share of the company with less toxic release. Then this kind of disclosure was a strong nudge to support this kind of good behavior by the company. Another also is a pre-commitment. It's very important. So you decide, you know that, for example, you tend to eat sugar intensive food, and then you apply kind of self nudge. Then you put the sugar, the highly sugar food very far from your on the shelves. Then you tend not to forget that they are there. It's also very difficult to take and to eat. And then is if you know that you are lazy, you park the car very far from your home, then you are obliged to walk more than usual. This is a kind of self-nudge or pre-commitment. And then these are also an important aspect of nudging.
Professor, digital platforms and algorithmic personalization have dramatically increased the power to influence choices. How does your framework for good versus bad nudges apply in the online world, where choice architectures are constantly optimized and often invisible?
When we are in this area, we tend to speak of dark nudges. The dark nudges are the nudges that are in the web. They tend to change your behavior in an unacceptable way because you are not aware that you are changing the behavior. Then you are the bad nudges, as I tried to show before. These dark nudging are also the nudge that Shoshana Zuboff described when she attacked the capitalism of surveillance, in which few behavioral variable allow the algorithm to think how you may change your behavior or how to push you to buy some goods because they see that you have the tendency to have this kind of aesthetic of consumption model. These obviously are very dangerous. Now, with artificial intelligence, always more powerful, will be sufficient few information about your consumer behavior to allow the advertising and the commercial message to be more focused on the most sensible part of your behavior, and then will change your behavior much more easy than before. After there is the case, very dangerous, of the digital autocracy. And for example, the social credit system in China is a very dangerous approach that use the information of your behavior to create a system that use algorithm and now artificial intelligence that allow some person to be supported and other to be punished. For example, if you are not behaving properly according to the standard of China Republic, you may not find any credit in the bank, or your children don't find are not accepting the application in good school and so on. Then this is also very close to autocracy. And in US, there is this kind of approach of techno or digital autocracy supported by people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk that have the same goal. Then these are the use of the digital platform to introduce nudges that are dark, manipulative, and they are I am considering the worst part of nudging approach.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. If a government minister came to you tomorrow and said, we want to use nudges, but we don't want to manipulate our citizens, what three practical design principles or tests would you give them to distinguish acceptable nudges from those that should never be implemented?
Well, the first aspect is to support, to introduce nudges based on evidence. Evidence in before introducing nudge, evidence after. Means that before introducing nudge, the nudge should be supported by empirical research, randomized control trials, if it's possible, in which they show that this nudge is effective. And at the end of introducing the nudge, try to analyze the real effect of this introduction. Second, should be nudges that are introduced using a democratic, participatory, and transparent approach to nudge. That means that there are nudges that more or less are accepted by not by all people, but at least by social representative and stakeholder that may tell you, for example, trade union, I may, or consumer movement and so on. Then you know that there is some social support. Second, better nudge that improve the public goods, that only nudge that improve the individual, that have only individual benefit. And obviously, the third is system two, that should be nudged that tend to empower, to strengthen the autonomy of the people because they are based on system two, system two of the mind.
Thank you, Dr. Riccardo Viale, for helping us to rethink what is meant to nudge citizens in ways that respect their intelligence, their agency, and their values. This conversation shows that behavioral science can guide policy without slipping into manipulation, and that good nudges are ultimately about enabling more reflective, informed, and adaptive choices. To our listeners, if today's episode made you question how your everyday decisions are shaped, I encourage you to explore the book, Nudges, and continue this reflection in your own lives and organizations. Thank you once again, Professor Riccardo Viale, for sharing your time, research, and publication with us today. This has been a truly enlightening. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you and to all the organization.